We've all played 2D action games that claim they have Souls-like depth, but let's be honest, most of the time that just means you die in 3 hits and have to walk back to your corpse. Nine Souls does something way more interesting and honestly way more difficult to pull off. It looks at From Software's Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, strips away a whole dimension, and somehow preserves the absolute mathematical precision of its rhythm-based combat in a flat 2D plane. Developed by Red Candle Games, the studio behind those incredibly atmospheric horror games Detention and Devotion. Nine Souls changes lanes completely into what they call Taopunk. It's this gorgeous hand-drawn blend of Far Eastern mythology and cold corporate sci-fi. You play as E, a vengeful cat-like hero out to murder 9 ancient rulers, but you aren't going to do that by button mashing or over-leveling. This game is a mechanical test of your reaction time. Unlike your standard Metroidvania where dodging gives you invincibility frames, Nine Souls forces you to stand your ground. Your primary defensive tool is a parry that requires microscopic timing. If you hit it early, you take chip damage. If you hit it late, you're dead. But when you time it perfectly, you accumulate chi charges that you can then unleash by dashing through the enemy to detonate talisman explosions on their back. It creates this hyper-aggressive, hypnotic gameplay where defense is literally your best offensive weapon. It's an absolute masterclass in mechanical restraint, proving you don't need a massive open world to deliver some of the tightest, most rewarding combat choreography in modern gaming. When Mercury Steam handed Nintendo the final gold master of Metroid Dread, it wasn't only a victory lap for a 15-year-old urban legend of a game project, it was a statement on how momentum should actually feel in a side-scroller. If you go back and play the original classic entries, Samus always felt a bit heavy. Intentional, sure, because she's wearing a massive tank of a power suit, but Dread completely redefines her agility. The addition of a seamless slide and a 360-degree free aim completely removes the friction between moving and shooting. But what makes Dread a masterpiece isn't just that you feel incredibly powerful, it's how effortlessly the game reminds you that you're still fragile. The EMMI zones are brilliant pieces of survival horror dropped right into the middle of a traditional exploration. The moment you step through those pixelated doorways, the audio design shifts. The music drops out, replaced by the mechanical clicking of a corrupted research robot that can kill you in a single frame if it catches you. It turns the traditional Metroid power fantasy completely on its head. You aren't exploring these zones to find secrets, you are sprinting through them, using your map knowledge to survive until you can find the temporary Omega Cannon to turn the tables. Its structure tests your spatial awareness under intense psychological pressure. It's rare for a legendary franchise to return after nearly 2 decades and somehow feel more modern, more precise, and more confident than any of the indie titles it originally inspired, but Dread pulled it off flawlessly. Alright, real quick, we just launched a brand new channel called GameRan. If you want the same coverage, but for all platforms, PlayStation, Xbox, and PC, not just the Switch, head down to the description and hit that link. Subscribing over there helps us out immensely as we push for that first 1,000 sub milestone. Seriously, thank you guys. Now let's get right into the next game. When Ubisoft first revealed The Lost Crown, the internet's reaction was, well, let's just call it violently cynical. People took one look at the hip-hop soundtrack in the trailer and the new protagonist and completely wrote it off. Which is a massive shame, because the team behind this is Ubisoft Montpellier, the exact same studio that gave us Rayman Legends. And what they delivered here isn't just a good Prince of Persia game, it is arguably one of the most mechanically airtight Metroidvanias of the entire generation. The movement in this game is immediately intoxicating. Sargon feels heavy but incredibly responsive, and the combat treats 2D space almost like a fighting game. You are launching enemies into the air, teleporting behind them, and parrying giant, screen-filling boss attacks that reward you with these gorgeous anime-style execution animations. But where The Lost Crown truly rewrites the playbook is how it respects the player's time. We all know the biggest friction point in a Metroidvania is finding a locked door. exploring for 3 hours, getting the double jump, and completely forgetting where that door was. The Lost Crown fixes this with a feature called Memory Shards. With a single button press, the game takes a literal screenshot of your current location and pins it directly to your map. It is such a brilliant, common sense solution that every game in this genre is going to have to steal it from now on. And from a technical perspective, this is the exact kind of release we need to see more of. In an era where AAA studios regularly ship broken, unoptimized messes that require 40GB day one patches, The Lost Crown is a masterclass in optimization. On the Nintendo Switch, it targets a rock-solid 60 frames per second and actually hits it. It's a complete, technically flawless experience right out of the box, proving that when you prioritize pure game design over bloated open worlds, you get a masterpiece. At first glance, The Messenger looks like an incredibly well-made love letter to NES-era Ninja Gaiden. You've got the tight jumps, the crisp 8-bit aesthetic, and a ninja protagonist trying to carry a scroll across a demon-infested wasteland. And honestly, if it stayed just that for its entire runtime, it would still be a fantastic action platformer. The core mechanical hook here is the Cloud Step. If you slash an enemy, a projectile, or a lantern midair, you gain an extra jump. It turns every screen into a kinetic puzzle where you're chaining aerial slashes together to never touch the ground. But Sabotage Studio wasn't content with just making a retro throwback. About midway through, the game pulls off one of the greatest tonal and mechanical shifts in modern indie history. It opens up its linear levels into a massive interconnected Metroidvania map and introduces time travel. Suddenly you're jumping between an 8-bit past and a 16-bit future. This isn't only a visual gimmick either. The level design actively changes based on which era you're standing in. A wall that blocked your path in the 8-bit era might be crumbled away centuries later in the 16-bit future, forcing you to constantly re-examine rooms you thought you already mastered. Combined with a self-aware script that constantly pokes fun at video game tropes through a hilarious shopkeeper NPC, The Messenger stops being a simple exercise in nostalgia and becomes a brilliant commentary on the evolution of game design itself. Ender Lilies was one of those rare melancholic sleeper hits that built its entire reputation through pure word of mouth. It was a beautiful, deeply depressing game with a fascinating combat hook, but its actual movement always felt a little rigid. Ender Magnolia Bloom in the Mist looks at that foundation, tightens every single loose screw, and accelerates the pacing to an entirely different level. We've traded the ruined medieval kingdom of the first game for the Land of Fumes, a striking toxic mix of dark fantasy and decaying steampunk machinery. The core combat hook returns, and it's still one of the most creative systems in the genre. You play as Lilac, and a tuner who doesn't actually swing a weapon herself. Instead, she purifies corrupted homunculi, basically tortured artificial life forms, and binds them to your face buttons. Think of it like building a custom loadout of stands from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. One button might summon a heavy brawler who swings a massive club, another might trigger a rapid-fire spectral gunner, and a third commands a beast that auto-tracks enemies in the air. Because you aren't waiting for a traditional sword swing animation to finish, you can overlap these attacks. You can have your heavy striker winding up a smash while you're simultaneously firing a volley of magic and dashing backward to avoid a boss's area of effect attack. It creates this beautifully chaotic rhythm where you're commanding a small army on the fly, but the biggest upgrade here is just how the game feels in your hands. Lilac is significantly more agile right out of the gate than her predecessor. The dodge has more snap, the jumping carries actual momentum, and the moment-to-moment exploration feels far less punishing without losing that crushing, oppressive atmosphere. Throw in another hauntingly gorgeous soundtrack by the musical group Millie, and Ender Magnolia doesn't just feel like a sequel, it feels like the final perfected realization of a brilliantly weird idea. At this point, we've all seen a million indie games try to capture that Hollow Knight or Ori lightning in a bottle. Most of them copy the look, but they completely miss the gravity. Literally, they feel floaty or heavy in all the wrong places. Bow Path of the Teal Lotus from Squid Shock Studios sidesteps that entire trap, by building its entire mechanical identity around a singular high-skill rule. If you're touching the ground, you're playing it wrong. It takes the classic down/bounce, the pogo mechanic we all abused, to survive the path of pain and turns it into the oxygen that keeps you alive. You play as a celestial blossom armed with a legendary bow staff, navigating a stunning 2.5D world heavily saturated in Japanese folklore and papercraft geometry. Every single time your staff connects with an enemy, a projectile, or a floating lantern while you're airborne, your jump and your dash automatically reset. It converts every single combat encounter and platforming gauntlet into a continuous, gravity-defying aerial dance. If you hesitate or lose your rhythm, you plunge directly into a spike pit or a wall of bullet hell projectiles. But it doesn't stick to the basic staff combat. The progression rewards you with staff transformations that you unlock by brewing arcane teas, giving you tools like the heavy mochi mallet to smash through physical shields, or a grappling tool to pull yourself across massive caverns. It is an incredibly demanding system with a deceptively high skill ceiling where the giant screen-filling bosses require you to track your character through intense visual noise. For a game that looks like a calm, hand-painted dream, its actual moment-to-moment gameplay is a razor-sharp mechanical test that demands total mechanical precision. The original Blasphemous was an absolute triumph of mood. The Spanish studio, The Game Kitchen, managed to take dark Catholic iconography, turn it into a disturbing pixel art nightmare, and make you feel the crushing weight of a world trapped in a cycle of religious torment. But if we're being completely honest, the platforming was a bit rough and the combat could feel sluggish. Blasphemous 2 doesn't only fix those complaints, it strips down the entire architecture of the combat mechanic and reconstructs it into an incredibly versatile weapon system. Right out of the gate, the game forces a critical choice on you by offering 3 completely distinct starting weapons. And this isn't just cosmetic, you've got Veredicto, a massive slow-swinging war sensor that hits like a freight train and can be ignited for fire damage but can't block. Then you have Sarmiento and Centella, rapid-fire dual rapiers that build up lightning damage as long as you don't get hit. And finally, Rigo Alba, a balanced sword that features a traditional parry and a blood pact mechanic. What makes this design choice brilliant is that these weapons are also your keys to exploration. Striking giant brass bells with your heavy mace creates physical soundwave platforms, while slashing spectral mirrors with your rapiers teleports you across gaps. Whichever weapon you choose first completely dictates the route you take through the non-linear map for the first half of the game. It completely removes the old-school frustration of running into arbitrary progression walls, replacing it with organic weapon-based puzzle solving. And it's worth noting how much better the game handles its pacing and optimization this time around. It drops you into a highly responsive, frame-precise environment where the animations are smoother, the hitboxes are meticulously clean, and the mechanical feedback feels incredibly tight. It's a masterclass in how to take a cult classic aesthetic, back it up with top-tier modern mechanical design, and deliver a sequel that feels superior in absolutely every measurable way. We need to talk about why so many roguelikes feel like a chore, and why Dead Cells absolutely doesn't. In most games of this genre, when you die, the game basically says, "Too bad, try again from scratch." It feels like a punishment, but Motion Twin figured out a design loop that tricks your brain into treating death like a progression mechanic. They call it a roguelite, but really, it's a finely tuned masterclass in tactical momentum. Every single run you make into the island's decaying corridors isn't about reaching the end, it's about harvesting cells. When you hand those over between biomes, not only you're getting minor percentage stat boosts, you are physically injecting new items, weapons, and passive mutations directly into the game's spawning pool. The next time you wake up at the start, you are stronger as a player. The literal architecture of what you can find has shifted. You went from a rusty sword to throwing frost blasts and dropping automatic crossbenders, but what anchors this entire gameplay is the tactile feel of the combat. Dead Cells has some of the most generous input buffering in the business, meaning the game actively anticipates what you want to do next. If you roll mid-swing, it cancels perfectly. If you get hit, you have a brief window to strike back and claw your health back. a brilliant mechanical echo of Bloodborne's rally system. It rewards aggression, removes input friction, and makes the act of moving through space feel unbelievably sharp. And for anyone tracking technical execution, Dead Cells is a legendary blueprint. It started as a modest indie project and expanded over years into a massive juggernaut, including entire crossover expansions like Return to Castlevania. Because everything is built on razor-sharp 2D sprites and beautifully optimized hitboxes, the game scales perfectly to portable hardware, maintaining a flawless frame rate even when the screen is a complete mess of explosions, numbers, and status effects. It's an incredibly rich, dense experience that functions completely standalone, a gold standard for long-term game design. When people think of Metroidvanias, they usually think of dark, brooding corridors or gothic castles. Ori and the Blind Forest looks at that tradition and completely flips the script, delivering a world that feels alive, vibrant, and deeply emotional. But do not let the stunning, Studio Ghibli-esque painted backgrounds fool you. Beneath that gentle, beautiful exterior beats the heart of an uncompromisingly precise platformer that will absolutely stress test your reflexes. What makes Ori unique isn't the standard double jump or dash. It's a single mechanic unlocked midway through the game called Bash. It is easily one of the most brilliant movement tools ever introduced to 2D gaming. When an enemy fires a projectile at you, or when you're near a floating spirit light, you can hold a button to freeze time for a split second. You then choose an angle, and when you release, Ori launches violently in that direction while simultaneously parrying the enemy or projectile in the exact opposite direction. Suddenly, everything dangerous in the environment becomes a stepping stone. Enemies aren't just obstacles you need to kill, they are kinetic launch pads that you use to maintain your momentum. It turns the entire world into a giant trampoline, transforming the act of traversal from a navigation puzzle into a rhythmic, flowing dance where you barely ever need to touch the ground. What Moon Studios achieved on a technical level is nothing short of a miracle. They built this game on a highly customized engine where the entire Forest of Nibel is completely seamless. There are no loading screens between zones. The definitive edition went even further, adding entirely new biomes, teleportation options, and fine-tuned balancing patches. When you look at how perfectly this gorgeous asset-heavy engine was optimized to run at a buttery smooth 60 frames per second on portable hardware, it shows a level of technical wizardry that puts massive AAA publishers to shame. It's a complete, pristine artistic achievement that stands as a definitive high point for modern platform design. For literal years, Hollow Knight Silksong wasn't just a video game, it was a collective internet hallucination. It was the ultimate clown makeup meme at every single gaming showcase, a title shrouded in so much radio silence that people genuinely wondered if Team Cherry had bitten off way more than they could chew. But when it finally dropped, it became instantly clear why it took 7 years. This isn't just a sequel that gives you a new character and a fresh coat of paint, it is a fundamental top-to-bottom redesign of how a Metroidvania handles momentum, risk, and recovery. The absolute biggest shock to your system when you transition from Hallownest to Fairloom is Hornet herself. The knight was a tiny, heavy, deliberate creature. Hornet is an absolute apex predator. She moves with a lethal, acrobat-level grace, but the real mechanical masterpiece here is how Team Cherry re-engineered the healing mechanic. In the original game, healing required you to stop, stand completely still, and vulnerable while channeling soul. Hornet uses Silk, and her healing action, called Bind, is nearly instantaneous. You can tap the button mid-air, flash heal 3 health masks in a fraction of a second, and keep moving. But that instant gratification comes with a terrifying catch. More enemies in Fairloom deal double damage right out of the gate, and if you get hit while trying to cast your bind, you lose all your accumulated Silk team. Cherry purposefully balanced the game to keep you snapping violently between being completely healthy and being one mistake away from the respawn bench. It forces you to play with a level of hyper-aggression that makes the original game feel like it's running in slow motion. And instead of the traditional charm system, Silksong completely pivots to crests and tools. Your crest determines the actual architecture of your build, changing your fundamental movement angles, your attributes, and how many tools you can carry. You're constantly tuning your kit on the fly, crafting brass needles, automated traps, and silk bombs using materials you harvest directly from the environment. It is an incredibly dense, fully optimized package that looks stunning and feels impossibly smooth to play, entirely self-contained without demanding massive modern hardware. Now that the dust has settled and the team is already tracking toward the upcoming Sea of Sorrow expansion, it's safe to say the myth was completely real, and it absolutely cleared the bar. If you enjoyed the video, do me a huge favor, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and check out one of the videos on screen right now. As always, I'm Cyril, big thanks to the community, and I'll see you on the next video.